We have a super show today. Author of Iced, the illusionary treatment option, Gary Reinl. 40 years in the strength and fitness industry. We're going to bring it all to you. Hello, welcome to another episode of the Rob Fletcher podcast. Today, I'm honored and privileged to have longtime friend Gary Reinl joining us. Before we dive into our show, I want to thank our partners, TRM, Trainer Revenue Multiplier, the premier wealth creation system for fitness coaches, doctors, and healthcare professionals that helps you earn more working less. Check them out at trainerrevenuemultiplier.com. We would also like to thank Top Doctor Magazine and Top Doc Clinic in Miami, Florida. I'm very excited to be part of partnering with them to expand the vision, bringing together the world of health, fitness, and anti-aging. With no further ado, I would like to welcome my good friend, author of Iced, the illusionary treatment option. He is truly extraordinary, Gary Reinl. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you, Rob. Happy to be here. Hey, I got a small correction.
Yes.
You're reading from my book. This October is 50 years.
50 years. 50 years.
October 1st is 50
You're giving us
years.
a timeline. You're giving us a timeline.
The timeline's running out, so you better hurry right now.
No, it really is, Gary. It's, of course, you is who you are, and you're surrounded by elite athletes, celebrities, coaches, professionals, all with your knowledge, and what you bring to the forefront is incredible. So there's several things I want to talk about. You've been on my show, the radio show, and podcasts throughout the years, numerous years now, and at many events. But first, I want to dive into ICE because, as you and I spoke earlier, I still think that a lot of people don't understand that. And as I always say, if you want to step into the ring with Gary Reinl and debate, that's fine. It's like going into the ring with Mike Tyson in his prime in a very calm way. That's the most outstanding thing to witness, is when you're actually just telling the story, telling it like it is, and providing the facts. So we'll start with ICE because I think many people, physical therapists, trainers, really need to know and dial in as to what it is, what you say, the illusionary treatment option.
I appreciate that. And just to help anybody who has not heard the message, over 1 million people have heard the anti-Rice message. So the rest ice compression elevation is the full protocol. And of course, all aspects of it are wrong. And some people say to me, who says I can read? And I read the literature. And if you want, I'll tell you what to go read. Then you would know yourself, or you can just listen to me. But I'll give a little tip. The doctor who invented, the Harvard trained doctor who invented the Rice protocol, after he read my book,
Awesome.
publicly recanted, said I made this up in my 1978 sports medicine book, the Rice protocol. Research has clearly shown I was wrong. Don't do it. It delays healing. And then gives a specific reference to the fact that it caused additional damage. His name is Dr. Gabe Merkin. Dr. Merkin not only publicly recanted, he then wrote the foreword to the second edition of my book. So let's get this set real clean. The doctor who made the most recognized reference recommended protocol in Western medicine not only publicly recanted, but wrote the foreword to the book that took down his legacy. Now, there's part two to that, if that isn't good enough for you. 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, at the National Athletic Trainers Association meeting, the athletic trainers are basically the clinical people on the sidelines of the games. They're the ones who run the field when something goes wrong. We're great people, very highly skilled, and very respected as a group. Now, you would think that group, if they agreed with the anti-Rice message, the anti-ICE message, you would think that'd be enough to just turn the whole room. The doctor who makes it up says it's wrong. The athletic trainers who are on the sidelines with all the players, if they said it's wrong too, gee, maybe you should listen. But just so happened, last year in Philadelphia, Dr. Tom Kamensky, and anybody who doesn't know that name, just Google Tom Kamensky, and you'll see one of the premier academians in the athletic training world. He's at the University of Delaware. He's a director of education for athletic training at the University of Delaware, but he's also a national figure, especially in concussions and ankle injuries. Dr. Kamensky gave a presentation at their national meeting, filled the room. And if you've never been to those kind of meetings, almost no one can fill the room. But he filled the room, aisles filled, 4 deep in the back of the room. His presentation was weaning off the rice protocol. And about his fifth slide was a copy of my book. And he said to the audience, read this guy's book. He's figured it out, explained it, and there's really not a lot more to understand.
Great.
Now, you see something like that and you go, that can't, no way could that happen. Not only am I telling you it happened, there's proof it happened. And anybody who's an athletic trainer, you can go on the website, on your national website for the organization, and you can rewatch it. Just look up Tom Kamensky weaning off the rice protocol, and you can watch the whole presentation, and you'll see he explains why it's wrong and what to do instead. And that becomes the big question that I'm pushed
Right.
with very often.
Right.
If that's wrong, what's right? Hold on, let's figure out why it's wrong first, because if we don't solve that
Right.
problem,
Right.
you might not go very far forward. So what's wrong with it? To understand what's wrong with it, first you'd have to say, what are you trying to do? So what's the goal? Why would you do that? Why would you put ice on a swollen ankle? And let people answer, and they'll give different answers depending on who you're talking to. And since I've done this, like I said, over 1 million people have heard the message, and I personally interviewed or interacted with hundreds and hundreds of the most elite trainers, doctors, and therapists in the country, athletic trainers. Now, with that said, what are you trying to do? Why would you put ice on to begin with?
Gary, I don't want to detract or get sidetracked here, so I want you to stay on point. But how did this all start? Because you tell the interesting story of how this whole icing process became a tradition or set in stone, or that's the proper way to take care of an injury. So
Yeah,
how,
well, what happened was, as far as I know, I'm the only person that traced it back, and I've never had anyone tell me that my tracing back wasn't accurate. So I'm very confident that I took it back as far as we could get it. And it goes back to 1962 with a young boy named Everett Knowles hopped a freight train in Somerville, Massachusetts, and in celebration cheered for himself with his arm and hit a stone abutment and ripped his arm right off. And when it tore his arm off, he thought he broke his arm, and he made his way up the hill to a factory, and some guys there saw him and called the hospital, and called an ambulance and got him over to the hospital, over to Mass General. To his good fortune, any place else may not have worked at that time. But a very advanced hospital still today, but in 62, they were really top of the heap.
right,
And when he got there, the doc who was in charge said, you know what? We have a perfectly healthy 12-year-old and a fully intact arm. Let's put it back on. Now, that became a big question, because how are you going to do that? Because it hadn't been done before. And while they were figuring out who they needed to get to the operating room and how they were going to get them there, remember, there wasn't cell
right.
phones. You had to go get everybody and go running across campus trying to find
Yeah.
people. So they go out in the task of retrieving all the people. And the doc who was in charge was Ronald Malt. And he said a comment that changed the history of sports medicine, changed the history of really acute care medicine. He said, while we're waiting, put that arm on ice. Now, why would you put a severed body part on ice? It'll stop it from rotting, the same reason that fish in the fish market are on ice. If you don't, they'll rot. So good idea. And that's what they did. Now, they sewed his arm back on. They did a great job. It actually worked. And his fingers turned pink and everything was great. And they were like, wow, this amazing surgery. And we did it. Now, it wasn't all perfect process. The young man had many surgeries following that to actually make it work, but he actually made it into adult life. He only died a few years ago.
Wow.
And his arm worked. They made it work. But here's the thing. When that was over, people asked the docs, hey, if this ever happens, what do we need to do? Because remember, before, all you did was threw the body part away and tried not to bleed.
Right.
That's what you did. So now what do we do? What you do, and this is where it gets a little sketchy on which doc said this, but the articles show that this was said. The doc said, remain calm, don't panic. That became rest. Keep the severed body part out of the sun. Keep it cool. That became ice.
Mm.
Use a tourniquet to prevent a bleed out on the intact part. That became compression. Keep the intact part above the heart. Lift it up to slow the blood loss. That became elevation. That's the Rice protocol, rest, ice, compression, elevation. Here's the irony. That has nothing to do whatsoever with managing damaged tissue.
Exactly.
It has with preventing a bleed out and preserving damaged tissue or severed tissue, severed body parts. So you see, it's like, how did that catch on? It caught on really easy because that was the only thing we knew. And people heard the story. Oh, you get hurt, put it on ice. They didn't do the rest of the story. This wasn't today where you have the internet and you can look up anything and find out what
Right.
you need to know. This was then the newspaper. There were 3 stations at night. The information came out. Put it on ice, keep it cold. Okay. The next thing, the public bought into the idea. Dr. Merkin named it 16 years later in 78 in his book. And when he named it, just about that time, the world of sports medicine was becoming significant. And what I mean by that, if you tried to find a sports medicine rehab center in 1980, good luck.
Yeah.
Today, there's one on every fourth corner. They're everywhere. But back then, they weren't there. So what happened was Dr. Merkin's idea caught on because, in my view, because it rhymed. Rice is nice. And everybody who went through school, the school nurse, the doctors, the chiropractors, the sports medicine, the athletic trainers, everybody learned rice is nice.
Right.
And about that time, something called soccer moms started to hit. And soccer moms was a really cool spot in time where all of a sudden all the children were playing games, soccer and baseball. And the moms were called soccer moms. They had these SUVs and they pull up to the games. They had a bag, and that bag had oranges and all kinds of stuff in it. But
And
it
of
had one other
course,
little thing.
what else? That's right.
It had a little bag you could crack and make it cold.
Right.
And thus everybody became an expert on how to manage damaged tissue. So if Johnny bumps his knee, put ice on it. Billy bumps his head, put ice on it. Didn't matter what happened, how it happened, or why it happened, put ice on it.
Automatic pilot.
And it got caught. And that's it. That's how it started. You could never justify it clinically. And how I can prove that? 40 years of widespread use, tens of millions of individual treatment sessions, and there's still no protocol. And there's no evidence it's beneficial.
Hence, Gary Reinl, the anti-ice man you have become.
I didn't do it on purpose. My actual goal was to try to figure out how to solve the problems with a technology that I work with, an electrical stimulation device. Remember back in our day when we got hurt, bumped our knee, anything that happened, coaches told us to walk it off, don't sit still, don't tighten up. Remember that? Walk it off, keep moving.
Sure do.
Okay, the reality is that's not a bad idea. That's actually how waste moves through your passive lymphatic system, and that's how nourishment gets to the damaged site. So it's actually a good idea, except if you're walking on a broken bone. That's not so good.
Correct.
So that area, that idea of walking it off suddenly became, don't listen to the coach, listen to the rice people. And with that, the whole industry shifted and we started doing something that I call stillness. And in the world
And
of
then
healing,
what was that? How far back in time was this?
the big shift happened in the mid 80s. That's when the soccer moms, I'm telling you, if they hadn't invented that little purple thing could snap and make cold, I don't think this ever would have happened. But it did happen, and now we're stuck with it. And we have people who believe that making things cold is somehow going to solve the problem. And if you choose to debate anyone, I encourage you not to do that. Don't debate them. Don't. Instead, let them talk. Say, so what do you believe it? Why are you putting the ice on? Oh, prevent swelling, get rid of swelling. It helps with range of motion. It stops the pain. They have all these things they say.
Right.
Let them say them. Let them tell you. And when they're done telling you, all you do is look at them and say, I understand, I hear you, and I believe that everything you're saying, you believe. I'm not questioning you. I have one question for you, though. Is it the best way to manage the problem? And the problem is that you have damaged tissue. And when you have damaged tissue, your goals should be prevent further loss and regenerate that which has been destroyed. That should be your goals. Okay, if that's your goal, then you're going to put a bag of ice on it and sit still and wrap it tight
Down.
and stick it up in the air.
Yeah.
And I would say to you, if you were to do that, sitting still is going to slow down vascular lymphatic flow. Making it cold is going to slow it down more. Compressing it's going to slow it down even more. And elevating it at the very least is going to slow it down in one direction. So what's the actual consequence of the RICE protocol? It traps the waste in and around the damaged site and prevents the natural flow of oxygen and supplies. Now, all you have to do then is just ask, does that sound like a good plan? Do you think it's a good idea? Now, Rob, you're not a doctor, but I'm going to ask you a very serious question. Do you feel that trapping the waste in and around the damaged site and preventing the natural flow of oxygen and supplies is a good idea if you're trying to prevent further loss and regenerate that which has been destroyed?
13 years ago, Gary, I'm going to say the same thing. We've had this conversation and it's still there. You know what that answer is. It's unbelievable. It's no, absolutely not.
It doesn't even make sense. It's so wrong. And in fact, I was once asked, I was giving a lecture at a university, and one of the professors said, so what are you saying? I said, very clear what I'm saying, but I'll state it differently if it works a little better for you. If I were trying to make up the worst possible way to manage trauma, musculoskeletal trauma, I'd say do the RICE protocol. What could be worse? And then I paused and I said, if you beat the air with a ball peen hammer while you're doing the RICE protocol, that would actually be worse. Now,
Right.
no, that doesn't sound right. Hold on, it is right. And all you have to do is look at it very carefully. What are you trying to do? You're trying to prevent further loss and regenerate that which has been destroyed or damaged. Okay, it's very simple. Two easy things on the top of your page. Okay, so what's the first thing that causes additional damage? Congestion in and around the damaged site that prevents the natural flow of oxygen and supplies. So how do you decongest the area in and around the damaged site? You've got to activate the muscles in and around that area, around the passive lymphatic vessels, and then you contract those muscles by activating them, and you push the waste up a chamber. The empty chamber now has negative pressure, pulls the waste out of the interstitial space, and so on. Looks like milking a cow backwards. Okay,
Right.
so it's
Yeah.
very simple.
Yeah.
So you have to decongest the area in and around the damaged site. Simple question, rhetorical. I'll answer it for you, so you don't have to do it again. But do you think that sitting still with a bag of ice wrapped tightly around the area while sticking up in the air is going to move waste to your passive lymphatic system? I'll answer for you. No, that won't work. So the first problem isn't, it's not going to fix that. Okay, what else goes wrong? What else causes additional damage? Disuse atrophy. What causes disuse atrophy? Disuse. So do you think sitting still with a bag of ice wrapped tightly around the area while stick up in the air is going to overcome the complications of disuse atrophy? You're not doing anything. It's going to make it worse.
Yeah,
Okay.
what blows my mind is that you train some of the most elite trainers throughout the country. You are in the locker rooms with the pro ball strength coaches, with the elite athletes and trainers, like I said. And then once you go in, I want you to give a few examples because you do have incredible testimonials and testaments to what we're talking about right here. So give a couple of examples that you've given me in the past of not using that RICE protocol and how that compares. Especially with
When,
baseball players, there was a few examples you gave of basketball players, baseball players especially, right? So
anything that makes you tired and sore. So whether you have slight trauma, say from if you're a major league pitcher to someone who has a knee replacement, it really makes no difference what's wrong. It's just the magnitude of what's wrong. So you're tired and sore, you still have to decongest the area in and around the damaged site. You still have to rebuild the related vascular network. You still want to prevent disuse atrophy. You still want to awaken and mobilize the stem cells in the area. So you still want to do what you need to do to solve the problem, whether it's slight or significant. And I've got testimonials from actually, if you want to post something, I actually have an interview with the head trainer for the Colorado Rapids, the Major League Soccer team, who has been at the top of the heap for 30 years. He's an athletic trainer, a physical therapist, and I believe he's also a CSCS, strength and conditioning guy. So he's been the head trainer for, this is literally 3 decades. At one time, he was the head trainer for the women's U.S. soccer team. And I have a video where I interviewed him where he tells the story of what actually happened with one of his athletes. They had a longitudinal quad tear, and he called it in the video a second-degree longitudinal quad tear. Whatever that means, how you do that, I don't know. But they did measure it with ultrasound and saw the blood in the area. And if you take what normally happens with that process, and again, I'm telling you where he's the head trainer, and I'll send you the video. You can link it to your thing if you want.
Yep. Sure.
And so what happened was he did what I said. He activated the muscles in and around the damaged site with our clinical product.
So this was
And,
a tear.
huh?
This was a tear. This was an actual tear.
Yes, it just depends on whether it's a second or a third. He called it a longitudinal quad tear when he wrote it, but when it was videoed, he called it a second degree a
Okay.
longitudinal tear.
Gotcha.
Okay, but whatever, it's enough. It's serious.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
bleeding internally.
Exactly.
So what he did was he was at that time he was the head trainer for the women's U.S. soccer team the year they won the Worlds. He put her on for about 8 hours with the muscle activation. In other words, he had her walk it off for 8 hours. Very significant muscle contraction in and around the damaged site to decongest the area. And when you decongest the area, now suddenly the nourishment can move as opposed to trapping it there like the Rice protocol does. So he pumped it out and pumped it out and pumped it out and pumped it out, about 8 hours worth. And the following day, they measured the blood in the quad with ultrasound. His word, gone. Now, with that, there's a comma. We turned a 4 to 6 week injury. This is him talking. We turned a 4 to 6 week injury into running in 3 days and playing in the World Championships in 10. Now, that sounds impossible unless you heard the next line that he said to me. He said, Gary, I was shocked at how fast what you said to do sped things up. I said, it didn't. He said, no, I've been doing this for decades. That's a 4 to 6 week problem. I said, mismanaged. Now we know how long it actually takes. It takes 3 days running, 10 days playing in the World Championships. Now, why? Because if you left that congestion in and around the damaged site, that leg would have been swollen and black and blue down to the kneecap the following day and would have likely been on crutches for, let's just say, a week to a week and a half, for sure. Because you wouldn't be able to move. It hurts so much. And it's so swollen, it won't bend. Now, with that, you would begin to suffocate and kill otherwise perfect healthy cells who are not involved in the initial trauma. So now, let's just say post-trauma, on a scale of 1 to 10, you were 10 before you got hurt. Now you're hurt and you're an 8. But now you've just killed off cells because of all the congestion. So now you're down to a 7. Now you can't move it, and you're not doing anything for a week and a half. So now you have atrophy. So now you're down to a 6. And now you say, no, wait a minute. This sounds like we're going in the wrong direction. No, we're going way in the wrong direction.
Right.
Now, on top of that, if you don't reorganize to repair tissue in and around the damaged site, especially with a muscle tear, especially there.
That's why I wanted to point that out, Gary. This is an actual muscle tear. It's not like a person has a bump.
Right.
It's a tear.
Just technically, so I don't get lost with somebody questioning that detail. If I punch you, if you punch me, and you hit my arm, you would break blood vessels, and that would be a tear. So like you could hit me and make my muscles tear, but this was a tear.
Right.
So whether it's a slight tear or a big tear tears in half, and you got to surgically repair it. So it's a tear. So now you say, so what else has to happen? You want to decongest it so you don't have that problem. So you don't suffocate and kill otherwise perfect healthy cells who are not involved in initial trauma. You don't want the tissue's atrophy. And then you've got to reorganize to repair tissue. There's 3 steps in healing: inflammation, repair, and remodel. That remodeling phase follows the first 2. And that's where if you don't remodel it, if you don't pull the muscle or work the muscle in its position of functional use, you'll get what are called adhesions. And I believe that's what you had when I first met you.
Exactly.
And those adhesions have to be broken. And if I recall, you actually shed tears when they broke some of the adhesions in your shoulder.
Correct.
Now, why'd that happen? Because they didn't reorganize their tissue while you were healing. So we want to do that. So simple question. Do you think that sitting still with a bag of ice wrapped tightly around the area while stick up in the air would decongest the area in and around the damaged site, prevent and retard tissue atrophy, and reorganize the repair tissue in and around the damaged site? Of course, the answer is no, that won't work. What will? Loading the tissue, nothing else. So you've got to load the tissue. Stillness is the enemy. It's the exact opposite of what you should do. Now, you say you want to regenerate the tissue that's been damaged or destroyed. Okay, so what do you got to do to regenerate it? You got to rebuild the related vascular network in and around that damaged site. So let's just take that picture of that thigh, okay, but longitudinal quad tear, and there's blood under the skin. That's the purple. That's the bruising. That bruising is there because you've ruptured vessels. So you got to go in there and rebuild that related vascular network. So, rhetorical question again, and I'm getting near the end of that point. But do you think that sitting still with a bag of ice wrapped tightly around the area while sticking up in the air would decongest the area in and around the damaged site? Would help you prevent disuse atrophy? Would help you remodel it? Would rebuild that related vascular network? Of course it doesn't. So what else do you have to do? Two more little quick things you have to do. If you want to rebuild the tissue, you've got to awaken and mobilize the stem cells in the area that will then go and differentiate and become what they need to be. They reside in the muscle. Anybody wants to look up an easy article on that, that'll take you to the more depth articles. Just look up Fountain of Youth Discovered in the Muscles. And this is great information, but
That
many
article,
people
that's
don't
an
know it.
article you, right?
That's not one of mine, but I reference it all the time. It's a great
Yeah.
article. And it's just called Stem Cells or Fountain of Youth Discovered in the
Big
Muscles.
topic today, Gary, too. I won't get sidetracked, but big topic, the stem cells today.
The stem cells that reside they're basically asleep. They're resting in your muscles. Only a discovery in the past quarter century. So it's not like it's real old information. And
Right.
lots of really smart people I've talked to had
Yeah.
never heard of it. These
Right.
guys are there and they self-renew. Now, with that said, you've got to awaken and mobilize those stem cells to the area. And on top of that, what you have to do is lower your myostatin levels. So myostatin, if you remember from the bodybuilding world, myostatin inhibits muscle regeneration. A quick reference back to people our age. Remember Boy Hercules back in the 90s was in all the newspapers, the big muscular little kid. He was like 12 years old with giant muscles. He didn't have the myostatin gene or hormone. So his muscles grew real big. So here's the thing. If your myostatin levels are elevated, it inhibits muscle regeneration. Clearly the wrong thing to do here. In
Right.
the bodybuilding world, guys will take something called MyoX. Don't know if the product is true, but its claim is it lowers your myostatin levels so your muscles can grow bigger. Okay, so here's the big point of that. Do you think that sitting still with a bag of ice wrapped tightly around the area while stick up in the air would decongest the area in and around the
We're
damaged
drilling this
site?
one home, Gary. We're
Would
going to drill it home.
You're messing me up when you talk in the middle of that. Do you think it would prevent or retard the disuse atrophy? Do you think it would reorganize the repaired tissue? Do you think it would help prevent would promote the rebuilding of the related vascular network, awaken those stem cells and mobilize those stem cells and lower your myostatin levels? The answer is no. It does the exact opposite. Stillness is the enemy. Now, why would anyone still do that? The only reason I can think of is that you never took the time to read my stuff. You read my stuff. And by the way, I didn't invent this. I just went in the literature and read it and then organized it. And
Yeah,
as far as I know, I'm the first person to do that.
Yeah, we'll mention this a few more times throughout the show, but the book Gary is referring to is Iced, the Illusionary Treatment Option. If you are a trainer, a strength coach, a physical therapist, just a mommy or a daddy even, it's a very straightforward book. Gary does an excellent job. It's a must read. And by the end of that book, if you're still in that world of icing and believing that's the right thing to do, you're actually doing your clients and your children, everyone an injustice because you're delaying the game.
Something for that also, and I do agree, the book did turn out very well. I liked how it laid out, but all I did was I started looking at the problem. Say, how do I fix this problem? How do I decongest the area? How do I prevent disuse atrophy? How do I reorganize repair tissue? How do I rebuild the related vascular network? How do I awaken and mobilize those stem cells? And how do I lower myostatin? So once you knew what to look for, it's already, you can Google it. You don't need to have any background in this topic.
It's true.
And
Very
you
true.
quickly realize that what they're doing is wrong. Now, understanding what to do is right, that's a little more complicated because you need to have some clinical understanding of someone gets a new knee. What exactly do you do then? That requires some clinical expertise, but knowing what not to do, that's simple. Don't do the Rice protocol.
No, this is, as I mentioned, the athletes today, how many injuries people come upon, even back to soccer, little leaguers, soccer players, baseball players, having all these countless injuries where they are out for 6 to 8 weeks because they're not following what is the correct protocol.
Yeah, actually, the big point on that to make it easy for anyone listening to follow, what was said by that trainer from the Colorado Rapids. What he said to me when we originally spoke back when this first happened, when he was with the women's U.S. soccer team, And by the way, the reason I can say that now is because he has recorded it and we've released it. I never said a word for years about him. Never said who he was. I told the story, but I never said what it was about. Now I can, because it's actually been stated by the clinician and we have the full story. He said to me, I can't believe how doing what you said, how fast it sped things up. And my response was, like I said a bit ago, no, now mismanaged, it takes 4 to 6 weeks, not properly managed. But here's the thing. This is the big key point. I don't speed things up. I normalize the rate of recovery by removing the related obstacles. There you go. That's the whole point. It's not supposed to take 4 to 6 weeks. It
Correct.
takes that when you mismanage it. I'm
Mismanaged.
not speeding anything up, because I've had doctors say to me, Gary, you may not want to speed this up. I never said I sped it up. People say that about me.
Right.
It usually takes a month. We did in 2 weeks. Okay. I didn't say you sped it up. I'm telling you that I don't speed it up. I remove the related obstacles and normalize the rate of recovery.
Gary, give the listeners an example of when you would ice. An example will refer to the boxer who gets punched in the eye and the eye starts to close.
If you put cold ice on damaged tissue, it will delay, it doesn't prevent, it will delay the inflammatory response, which then brings that swelling to the area.
And that is why the boxers, when they do get their eyes starting to swell up and shut, just for those out there, that's the reason why you would use ice in that circumstance.
Yeah, you're also not claiming it's helping.
It's not helping.
It's just stopping the problem temporarily.
Correct.
Another example would be, and this actually happened, say you had a junior soccer player, someone 13, 14 years old, and they dislocated their ankle. And you're 45 minutes from the hospital, and no one where you're at where the accident occurs knows how to relocate the ankle. All you have is a driver and a bag of ice. Put the ice on the kid's ankle. Why? Because first of all, he'll feel like he's doing something. It'll make it hurt less, because that ice is going to numb it out. It's going to shut down the signal somewhat. And then on top of that, it actually slows down the swelling to the area. Remember, I didn't say it stops it. It slows it down. It delays it. It's going to come when they take the ice off and the tissue warmth, it's going to swell. But here's the thing. When you get to the hospital, instead of someone who's panicked and pain, it's all swollen, they're relatively calm because now it's numb. And they walk in, and because it's not swollen, it's easier to relocate. It's difficult to relocate a joint that's very badly swollen. So you have a calmer person who's in less pain. It's easier to relocate the joint. Okay, that's a good reason to use it. I'm all for that, but I'm just not for using it for the wrong reason. Like you tell me it's going to relieve the pain. And I say, wait, let me get this straight. I'm home now. I dislocated my shoulder, or I broke my collarbone. Let's say I broke my collarbone. And it's hurting really bad. And I don't want to take drugs, which I don't recommend that either, by the way, because that screws up the inflammatory response. So I don't want to do that anyway, but it's recommended I put ice on so I can sleep. Okay, but here's the problem with that. When you shut off the signals that alert you to harmful movement, and you need movement to solve the problem, in other words, you need to walk it off, what you've just done is you've shut the signals off that alert me to harmful movement, and say I fall asleep. And the whole time I'm sleeping for 3 hours or whatever it is, I'm distracting the fresh fracture site. Now, anybody with a clinical background out there, or anybody who can just think that through, you think it'd be a good idea to make something numb, shut off the signals that alert harmful movement.
Another person that I know you're very good friends with also, and he's very popular out there, is Dr. Kelly Starrett, the Ready State. So he also, of course, however that the relationship began or started. I know that you have a video out there with Kelly, and he is extremely popular, but once you gave the information to him, he was on board 100%.
He actually is far more popular than me. But in my book, and when he introduced me in that video, he introduced me as one of his key mentors. And I said, Kelly, I really appreciate that, but I'm not in the same category as you. I'm a reporter. I'm a teacher. I'm not a clinician. And he said, no, you changed me. You changed what I was doing. And all I did was explain to him what I just explained to you. Anybody who will listen and then just let me ask that question, do you think what you're doing is the best way to solve the problem?
Right. Yeah.
And if you say no, then I said, what do you think would be the best way? And then we start to talk. And maybe you'll ask me to say, what do I think is the best way? And I would say, you probably want to decongest the area in and around the damaged site. You probably want to prevent or retard disuse atrophy. You probably want to reorganize the repair tissue so faulty scarring doesn't lead to adhesions. You probably want to rebuild the related vascular network in and around the damaged site. You probably want to awaken and mobilize the stem cells in the area. And you probably want to lower myostatin levels. So let's just open our book, go to Wikipedia, for heaven's sakes, go
Right.
anywhere you want to go and just say, okay, how do these 6 things work?
Right.
And when you're done, you can draw no conclusion except for what I have said, is that ice or rice is an illusionary treatment option.
No, it's awesome. And then again, many times throughout the years that we know each other, I've called you where I had an injury. I explained to you what I did. I think recently the shoulder was several times, but I remember a few years back was sparring. And then I wasn't sure if I ripped it and ever got it checked out, but it was frozen. I couldn't move it. And then I called you up. You gave me the protocol, which included, which we'll talk about now also, is your Mark Pro. I know that there was movement involved. I know definitely not to ice, but then I was like, Gary, I got to do this and this next 2 weeks. What do I do? And I had your Mark Pro there, and you said, put that Mark Pro on, don't take it off. In 2 days, it was incredible. It was amazing. So, talk a little bit about the Mark Pro and what it does.
Well, what we're doing is electronically walking it off. So all of the clinical benefits, all of the reality that is in place throughout history of movement to solve problems, we're electronically walking it off. So whether you're using our prescription product for an injury or a Mark Pro for being tired and sore, you're simply using the muscle as a pump to move nourishment and waste. Simultaneously to moving that nourishment and waste, you're of course decongesting the area in and around the damaged site. And in doing so, you're preventing the disuse atrophy because you're using it. In doing so, you're reorganizing the repairing tissue because you're loading it in the position in the function of use. On top of that, you are rebuilding the related vascular network through a process called angiogenesis. And then what that just means is you're rebuilding the related vascular network in and around the damaged site. That simultaneously awakens the stem cells in the area, awakens and mobilizes the stem cells, and lowers your myostatin levels. So here's the crazy thing about it. A professor said to me, and it was great because he interrupted me at just the right time in my talk. And he said, Gary, you're making this sound too simple. And I said, sir, it had to be simple. Imagine if there were 6 different stimuli, 6 different ones. You got this one to decongest it, this one to prevent disuse atrophy, this one to reorganize repaired tissue to prevent the adhesions, faulty scarring, this one to rebuild the related vascular network, this one to awaken and mobilize the stem cells in the area, and this one to lower your myostatin levels. We'd never heal.
Right.
It had to be built that way. The great creator knew one thing you could count from humans, from animals, by the way. One thing you can count is that we wouldn't sit still. We had to move. We had to be on the move. And so if you have to move, wouldn't that be a perfect place to put in for how you self-heal? Self-healing is contingent upon movement. No movement, no loading, no healing. And if you don't compromised healing. I don't want to say none because sometimes you're going to heal if you do nothing. It's just going to take it's going to take that 6 to 8 weeks,
Right.
4 to 6 weeks instead of 3 days running, 10 days playing the world championships. So it all becomes a question of what do you want to do? How long do you want to stay hurt? And how much compromise are you willing to take? For example, let's just say we never met and you just kept following the advice of the people you were working with. I guarantee your shoulder would not work now. There's no way you would. They couldn't even clean it up with surgery at this point.
After knowing you for so long, I can only imagine if I actually did that and just sat there and had ice on it for a week or 2 without no movement or no anything, no active recovery, no Mark Pro. Yeah, I agree. It was
By
a bad.
this point, you'd have what they call a frozen shoulder, and they might be able to work with it by putting you under and trying to break the adhesions. Probably wouldn't work. They might have a surgery to go in and clean it up, but it would be a mess.
Right.
When all you had to do was follow the functional rules of tissue regeneration.
Yeah. So let's go. Let's repeat this. We've been over it throughout the show, but for all the athletes out there, especially with our young athletes, they go into a game, they twist their ankle, they twist their wrist, they sprain something. Give them step by step. Again, I know we're redundant here, but give them the step by step. If they
Well,
twist their ankle, they come off the fields.
the
What's the
first
protocol?
the first thing you have to do is find a neutral position. Okay, so you're trying to find a position that doesn't hurt. Now, an example. Let's say you rolled your ankle. We'll use you as the example. You quickly realize that hopping on that ankle made it hurt more than if you didn't. And then you found, gee, if I lay down like this and go like that and put it up on a towel, it hurts way less. Okay, find that neutral position. Whatever it is, find your neutral position. By the way, if you're not sure, try the wrong thing and you'll know that's the wrong thing. Try the
Right,
opposite of that. Okay,
right,
hopping on this is not going to feel good.
right.
So you find a neutral position and then you try to begin solving the problem. What's the problem? Congestion in and around the damaged site. Now, if there's someone there who is somewhat of a clinical expert and they can determine the fact that, look, you got hit by a fastball in the shin bone and it's swollen, but it's not broken and everything looks okay. Okay, fine. You're ready to go. But if you don't know if there's a broken bone or
Right,
dislocation, you need to confirm what's going on.
right, right,
Now, with that said, you don't want to waste too much time before you start activating the muscles in and around the damaged site. And when we grew up, Rob, they called it ankle pumps. So we would sit there and we'd wiggle
right.
our foot. And if we hurt our hand, we'd squeeze a sock. And that's what we do. We all knew to do that. We knew if we let our hand just sit like this,
Freeze. Yeah.
2 days from now, it would still be swollen and still hurt, and I wouldn't be able to bend my fingers. So you got to move. You have to activate the muscles in and around the damaged site. Now, you have to be sensible. My rule is very clean. Use your brain, never cause. That's
You
use your
told me
brain,
that
never.
many, many years ago, and that stuck with me. Exactly.
That's the rule. Use
Through
your
all
brain,
my
never cause
injuries.
pain.
Yep. Through all my injuries, that's the one thing I keep on the forefront.
If what you're doing causes greater pain, then you need to figure out a different way to solve the problem. Now, what about it? And in my book, I have examples where someone says, I can't move my ankle. Okay, can you wiggle your toes? Yeah, okay, wiggle your toes. Can you flex your quad? Yeah, okay, flex your quad and wiggle your toes. Can you flex your calf? Oh, that hurts. Okay, don't do that yet. Don't. Let's just do your toes and your quad, and we'll work our way into it. If I've got an electrical stimulation device that we use with our technology, then I put that device on the bottom of the foot, up on the thigh, and I'll start to pump and start to increase the circulation. And people will say to me sometimes, would that be enough? I didn't say it'd be enough, but let's do a traffic jam, a traffic accident analogy. Very simple, okay? The road's closed. Tractor trailers are crossed. There's no way through. But now the police are there. They've got the injured people off and in the ambulance and they're on their way. And the mess is there. And they don't have anybody. There's no tow trucks there to move the big truck yet. But some of the police officers have figured out how to let you go up on the shoulder and around the dirt and back down. And they start letting some of the cars through. Not everybody, but some are going through. If you happen to be on the right-hand side, you got it made. You're over in the left-hand lane, 5 lanes over, it ain't so good. But it's moving. Now the tow truck comes, and they're able to move the truck just out of that other lane, out of the left-hand lane. Now they got 2 lanes going on both sides. It ain't perfect yet, but it's moving.
Right.
That's like the analogy I just gave you, or the example I just gave you of doing your toes and doing your quad when you tell me you hurt your ankle and you can't do it. Give me what you can. Do something. Stillness is the enemy.
That's awesome. Still, I love that line. You said that many years ago. Stillness is the enemy. Gary, we're closing out right now. So people, you can check out Gary. Highly recommend the book, Ice, the Illusionary Treatment Option, and check him out at GaryReinl.com. I believe on Twitter, Anti-Iceman, Gary?
At the Anti-Iceman.
At the Anti-Iceman. And then on Instagram?
It's probably the same thing, but I don't do Instagram.
You don't do Instagram. So check out his website. Get the book. And if you're not dialed in to what Gary's been doing now for how many years, Gary? When did you start?
This October 1st is 50 years.
50 years. The man is filled with a wealth of knowledge. Reach out to him if you have any questions. Gary is one of the biggest advocates of this industry that we need to really educate others to enhance your performance on and off the field. And again, just to the young athletes out there, to mom and dad, this is not just for the athletes. This is for day-to-day living. What Gary's saying is the difference is choose your weapon, 6 to 8 weeks, or doing it the right way. Mismanagement, 6 to 8 weeks. Manage it properly, big difference.
Rob, I'd like to give you one last thing for close on all that information. I have an analogy that I explain to everyone I talk to in all my classes. I always say, your goal is to decongest the area in and around the damaged site. Until you do that, everything's compromised. It's just there's no way around it because that's that traffic jam not letting any cars through.
No,
So you got to decongest the area in and around the damaged site. And my analogy goes like this. If you knew it was going to snow 24 inches in the next 24 hours, if you knew it, 1 inch per hour, if every hour in the hour you'd open your front door with a good stiff broom, you could effortlessly keep that inch of snow off your sidewalk. Effortlessly, simple. If, however, you wait till morning and open your door to 24 inches of angry snow, I assure you, you will not clear with a good stiff broom and it will not be effortless.
Well, the one and only Gary Reinl. It's always a pleasure and an honor just hanging there 1 minute. Again, I want to thank our partners, TRM, Trainer Revenue Multiplier, the premier wealth creation system for fitness coaches, doctors, and healthcare professionals that helps you earn more working less. Check them out at trainerrevenuemultiplier.com. We would also like to thank Top Doctor Magazine and Top Doc Clinic in Miami, Florida. Very excited to be partnering with them to expand the vision, bringing together the world of health, fitness, and anti-aging. This show is about education and raising awareness. Listen, learn, apply, reinforce, try. And right here, you heard it from one of the very, very best in the industry, Gary Reinl. Gary, thank you very much. Look forward to having you on again and continue to do what you're doing because we really appreciate all that you do for the world of sports and also for, like I said, the mom and dads of the world and everyone taking care of their kids.
Thank you. And the meltdown continues.
For the Olympia weekend, a combination of bodybuilding, sports, fitness, and now anti-aging. We have the Anti-Aging Pavilion coming up. It's in Orlando, November 3rd and 4th. So make sure you check that out. You can find out more at MrOlympia.com. And the launch of Muscle and Fitness Plus Talk Show coming up. We start our recording coming up in a couple of weeks. Very excited about that. So make sure you check out Muscle and Fitness Plus. Look into the Olympia weekend, November 3rd and 4th. Rob Fletcher, till next time, stay healthy, stay fit, stay strong.